I can tell you in Colorado Springs, we generally have 3 to 4 excessive use of force complaints a year, and nothing like this. And the investigation generally finds that excessive force was not used during that time. But on occasion, we disciplined somebody for using force. 4 officers were indicted. 1 officer pled guilty, got probation. 2 officers went to trial and got acquitted. 1 officer is still waiting to go to trial. Pretty interesting. We all think that they're all guilty, but a couple officers went to trial, and the jury said, no, not guilty. So it's an interesting case. All right, so here's, we talk about complaints to the police department. We have what we call level 1 complaints, which is discourtesy complaint. You see an officer driving too fast, you see him texting on the cell phone. Those kinds of things are less serious kinds of complaints. We call those level 1 complaints. And you notice the number of complaints per year are right up here. This is what I like to point out to people. Calls for service. So we had 270,000 calls for service, and we had 290 level 1 complaints. Now, 270,000 calls for service, that doesn't include traffic tickets, that doesn't include me contacting somebody on the street, that doesn't include all the other kinds of contacts we have in the police department. So there's well over 400,000 contacts we have in a year. And over 400,000 contacts, we have 290 complaints. Level 1 complaints about discourtesy, driving, whatever else kinds of things like that. So it's about 10% of complaints per there. Now, level 2 complaints, that's the more serious complaints. That's the excessive force complaints, that's a line, that's illegally entering somebody's house, that's collecting evidence illegally, all those other kinds of things that are really big. And in 2013, we had 23 of those throughout the year. So that's not really, if you look at the number of contacts and the number of times we contact police departments or the citizens, that's not really a whole lot for that. 23 is more than what we want to have. We want to have 0 of those, but we do have some of those. And out of those 23, 10 of them were sustained complaints, or meant that the officer did something wrong. And when they do something wrong, we do discipline people, and discipline has a long range of stuff, from a verbal counseling, just saying, hey, you know what, if you're not going to a call for service, you don't need to be speeding in the police car, don't do that, to termination, days off, suspension time, written reprimands, and additional training, those kinds of things. So there are things that we do in the police department to make sure that we're running the way we should be. Here's a question for you. Is lying in police work okay? No. Who says no? See, you have to say. No, you say no? Why not?
We're supposed to be protecting us.
Ah, protecting us. Who else said no? Why no, sir?
No, there's not a good way. If you lie about something, things will go from bad to worse.
Hey man, you gonna buy some meth? Are you a cop? I'm a cop. You gonna buy that meth from me?
Absolutely not.
So if I say, hey, you wanna buy some meth, and you ask me, am I a cop? And I say no, is that illegal? What do you think? Is that illegal?
No.
We'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay? We'll go to a lighter, maybe fib or white lie. So when I-25 was 2 lanes and we were making it 3 lanes, we had these barriers, these concrete barriers along both sides of the road, called Jersey barriers, and we didn't have anywhere to run radar for catching speeders through that area. And we know that people do speed, and construction workers from time to time do get hit by cars and that kind of stuff. So what we did is we had 2 officers dress up like construction workers with a piece of surveying equipment, a radar gun, and then we had other officers down the road, and the officer would radio to them and say, okay, the blue car in the second lane with the one male driver is going 65 and a 55. And the other officer would stop them. What do you think about this? First off, is that a lie? Not a lie? No one says it's a lie? Are we trying to pretend to be something we're not? Is that lying then, if you're trying to pretend to be something you're not? I don't know, I'm just asking. Is this okay? You say yeah, why is it okay?
Because it's protecting construction workers. You guys are saying that it's illegal. Everybody knows it's illegal to drive over the speed. That is illegal. So just because cops aren't around doesn't make it legal for you to speed.
Okay, so it's illegal and we're protecting construction workers. Anybody else?
Well,
Yes.
it wouldn't be okay for the construction workers to put on police uniforms.
Okay, it wouldn't be okay to go the reverse,
Right.
for them to try to slow down by saying, hey, we're police officers. All right, actually that's against the law.
Right.
There's a specific statute against that, to do that. Yes?
Well, these police officers are still wearing their uniform. They're just wearing a hard hat and a construction vest for being during construction zone. You kind of have to.
Oh, OSHA says we gotta wear that stuff, right?
Yeah, so
you know?
technically they're in the open. Like,
Technically they're in the open,
you're fine.
so we're fine.
Yeah.
Because even though we're trying to blend in and stuff like that, we're okay. So is there any difference between this and us hiding behind the bushes or the billboard sign and having our radar gun go off or anything like that? Anybody have any real issues with this? We only did this a couple times, but we put this in the Gazette. Why did we put this in the Gazette? Be proactive. People read this and they're driving down the road and they see somebody in orange vest that has some kind of equipment in their hand. Are they going to think twice to themselves, oh, is that a cop running radar? I better slow down? Yeah, that's kind of the philosophy of what we did and why we did that. But a day or two later, we had this tell it to the Gazette letter come in. I'll read it real quick, most of it. I'm a retired police officer who was frankly disturbed by the article describing creative ways Colorado Springs Police Department is enforcing laws. Where excessive speed is concerned, the object is to slow people down and save lives. This is best accomplished by having a well-marked patrol cars being very obvious about enforcing speed limit. What CSPD and State Patrol, I like the way they throw in State Patrol, are doing is generating revenue. It's not supposed to be the object of traffic enforcement. I'm seeing more and more traffic stops being made by unmarked cars. I'd hate to think the department is fine the CSPD would stoop to using tactics usually reserved for sleazy little towns known for their speed traps. Is that the image that Colorado Springs City Council wants them to have? I've got nothing but respect for CSPD. I'd like to see them become a little less creative when it comes to enforcing traffic laws. The point that I like to make out of this, particularly when I'm talking to law enforcement officers, is anytime that you misrepresent yourself to the public at large, some trust goes down. Some people will say, you lied to me then, how do I know you're not lying to me now? And while this is not an out-and-out lie, but I think we were trying to be a little shady, a little slick in what we did. All right, vice narcotics officers. So I gave an example of a narcotics officer trying to make a buy of narcotics. And so do I have to tell them I'm a police officer if they ask? We have one no. Do I have to say that I'm a police officer? No, I do not. I do not have to do that. Many criminals think that I do. And some officers every once in a while say yes and they buy drugs anyway. All right. So I can do that. Supreme Court says that's okay. It's okay to lie in that. So, I come and I figure out that I have probable cause to arrest you, and I put handcuffs on you. Do I have to read you your Miranda rights?
Yes.
How many say yes? How many say no? What kind of job have you been doing in this class?
We haven't got to Miranda.
Okay. I'm gonna steal some of his thunder. I do not have to read you Miranda when I arrest you.
Oh.
That's all on TV. It makes it look good for TV. You know, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to have an attorney with you, present with you before any question. If you wish one, if you can't afford to hire an attorney, one will be provided for you before any. I don't have to say any of that. I can arrest you and put you in jail without reading your Miranda rights. So why do we have Miranda? You haven't gone over this yet. Question. Absolutely. If I'm going to, yes ma'am.
I was going to answer your question.
Yes.
I believe we have the Miranda rights because if officers are going to ask you questions that could criminally charge you against something, it's to protect you, so you can either choose yes or no.
Perfect. You expanded upon what he said very well. If I'm going to ask you questions that's going to possibly incriminate you against a crime, and you are in custody, I have to read you Miranda. It's a two-pronged test. In custody, and I'm asking you questions that could incriminate you. Now, if you're in custody, can I ask you your name and date of birth and social security number and where you live? All those kinds of things? Absolutely. Without reading you Miranda?
Yes.
Yes. Because the vast majority of that's just personal data kinds of things for me to get for that. So, I arrest these two young ladies for aggravated bank robbery. They came in with AK-47s, shot a couple rounds in the ceiling, said, "Everybody down on the ground," jumped up on the counters with their bags, took $150,000 worth of cash, closed it up, jumped in their stolen car, drove about a mile away, got into another stolen car, drove again, and got away. But CSPD, being the great detectives that we are, we find them, and we arrest them. I take them downtown, take them to the police department. I put one in one interview room, and I put another in the other interview room. I come to her, and I say, "I'm going to talk to you and ask you some questions here in just a minute. Before I do, I got to read your Miranda rights." So I read her Miranda rights, and she says she wants an attorney. Can I talk to her anymore?
No.
I cannot. That is true. Am I going to jump right in and talk to her at this point in time? No, I'm not. I'm going to go get me a cup of coffee, drink a Coke, do some paperwork. I'm going to wait 45 minutes or an hour and do some other things. And then I'm going to come back in and talk to her and say, "In just a minute, I'm going to read you your Miranda rights. But as you know, I talked to your partner first. She already told me what happened, and she said you were the one that started. So I'm going to read your Miranda rights, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to clear the air and tell me your side of the story, because I already have her side of the story." Is that legal?
Yes.
So I can lie to somebody in an interrogation? Anybody say I cannot lie? Just a minute ago you said I couldn't lie in police work at all. And now I've got you saying I can lie anytime I want to. But you're absolutely right. Supreme Court says I do not have to tell the truth in interrogation. What I cannot do is tell her such a lie that somebody would be in such a state that they would tell me something just to try to get out of custody or just to try to get it over with right now. And what I'm saying is, so I talk to her and I say, "You know what? I got to talk to you before I let you go, but I want you to know your husband was in a terrible accident. He's at the hospital. They don't know if he's going to live or not, but I'm going to talk to you first." Now, is that kind of putting pressure on her to say, "I want to talk to them right now and get it over with so I can go see my husband"? Yes. I can't do things like that. Can I come up and have a DVD in my hand and say, "Hey, you know what the bank has? They have surveillance tapes. And guess who I saw in the surveillance tapes with an AK-47? and this is a blank DVD in my hand. Can I do that?
Yes.
Can I make up evidence? In essence, that's what I'm doing. I'm making up evidence. Can I do that? Step up. You say yes? Now you're not so sure, are you? I can do that too. That's okay. Because if I said I had a DVD of you robbing a bank with an AK-47 and you didn't do that, is that me saying that going to make you confess? No, it's not. But if you did do that, would that help me in getting your confession because you already think I already know? Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Rich.
That's a school issue. It's not my personal.
Can you log me back in then? You need to increase your...
Hey, they already preset that. My IT guy's in the back, maybe he can help us.
Yes.
So I have a question, so,
Absolutely.
but that is, I see where you're going with that whole thing, I totally get that. My question is like, how many cases actually over that, over?
Thousands, tens of thousands. I mean, it's not uncommon for officers to lie in an interrogation, particularly street officers. I can tell you, now what's the problem with me lying? What's the problem with me saying I have that DVD and I show that you're here, or I tell her that her partner already confessed? What could be an issue for me as a police officer, even if it's okay, if it's legal?
Credibility.
They call your.
Credibility. And what else?
Call your bluff.
Call your bluff. Now where am I at? Okay? And is she ever going to believe another officer? Because she's going to find out in the case report, when it goes to trial or whatever else, that she lawyered up and I never talked to her. Is she ever going to believe another police officer when they tell him something? No. You'd be surprised, though, how many criminals out there are lied to multiple times and continue to confess to things. But, so what happens is, as you get better in interrogations, rarely do you lie in interrogations. You can do much the same thing without lies. Let me give you an example. Derek Graham is one of our premier homicide detectives. He's been a homicide detective for probably 18 years. We had a body that was found up Giant Mountain Canyon, you know, up there by Helen Hunt Falls, and that up in that area, and had a suspect that we believed that was up in the area that dumped a body, but we couldn't prove that. And so, during the interrogation with this suspect, Derek says, you know, there's people up there all the time walking and seeing vehicles and those kinds of things, people taking photographs, people taking videos of their families, all those kinds of things. You know, we're out there right now talking to those people, collecting those photographs, collecting those videos and those kinds of things. Are we going to find your picture on any of those videos? Are we going to find your vehicle on any of those videos? Now, maybe we're out there looking for those people and talking to them. Maybe we're not. But is that leading somebody to say, if they were up there, oh, they're going to find out anyway? So it's not really an out-and-out lie. And they will go up and do investigations and talk to people and see if they can find those things. In a homicide, they do all those kinds of things. So that will be done at some point. So you get better in interrogations. You don't rely on the lying. But if you only do interrogations once a month, once every couple months, or whatever else as patrol officers, where you're not really engaged in high-level things like that, you might stoop to those lies kinds of things that you do. All right, any questions about Miranda? Any questions about lying in police work? I'll tell you a story about lying in police work in just a few minutes. Actually, it leads right into this question. Profiling. Is profiling a concern?
Yes.
Yes. Who says yes? Back in the back. Why is profiling a concern?
Profiling is a concern because some policemen or other official authorities might have in their head that a certain, say like a certain color of people is automatically bad no matter what they do. So if they think that when someone just walking by the street, they're automatically going to assume that they're up to something bad, and the guy looks suspicious right next to them.
Okay. Who else thinks that profiling is a concern? Why is profiling a concern?
Sure, I think that officers and people in general look for patterns as well as terms of stereotypes.
Okay.
Therefore, they start seeing certain things, people as they contact more so, so that they're going to see more people that's more suspicious compared to another group of people.
Okay. See some group of people more suspicious as others. And what's wrong with me thinking that somebody's more suspicious than others? Clouds your judgment. Maybe I intervene more often in that group of people. Maybe I do some things that I shouldn't do because I think that they're suspicious. What's your thoughts?
Just that, like, the Trayvon Martin case and, like, Ferguson, the police officers, like, profiling, African American male, think they're, like, automatically guilty.
Okay, I'm not going to get into a lot of stuff about either one of those, but Trayvon Martin Police Department wasn't involved in that.
Like,
That was a citizen. And the other, in Ferguson, and his name just escapes me, I apologize. Michael Brown, thank you. Michael Brown was committing an illegal act when the officer contacted him. And there's no question about that, now that the facts have come out. Now, did he contact him because there was a black and he wouldn't contact a white doing the same thing? I can't answer that question, but he was doing something illegal when that occurred. Is there a difference between criminal and racial profiling? We talked about racial profiling, Hispanic, black, Asian, whatever it is. I think that they're criminals, and so I'm going to suspect that blacks or Hispanics or Asians or whatever it is are committing more crimes, and so therefore I'm going to follow them more, I'm going to stop them more, I'm going to talk to them more, and because I do that, I find more things wrong. Because if I contact and talk to somebody, there's going to be a percentage of people that are doing things wrong, and that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So yeah, I stopped these guys, and I found them doing something wrong. So therefore, I stop more of them, and I find more doing something wrong. But if I would have stopped white males the same percentage of times, I probably would have found them doing something wrong just about the same percentage as whatever minority going on. So what is criminal profiling? Yes, ma'am.
Criminal profiling is when you use information that you gather from a crime scene to determine the
Okay,
suspect.
so I'm getting evidence from crime scenes that's pointing me to somebody. All right? Is that okay? All right? Do you guys profile? Yes.
Yes.
I profile too, every single day. But it's based upon behavior. What are you doing? Not based upon you being black, Hispanic, Asian, Dominican Republic, whatever it is. It's not based upon that. It's based upon behavior. So, if I'm driving in my patrol car, checking businesses at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I hear glass break, and I drive around the corner, and I see somebody running from where the glass is broken, and I chase after them and tackle them, is that profiling? That's criminal profiling. That's behavior. Doesn't the glass break in a close proximity, somebody running from the glass break when a patrol officer comes, does that give you a reasonable belief that that person might have broken that window
Yes,
at 3 a.m.?
yes.
Yes. And so that's the kinds of things that I'm talking about when we say criminal profile. What are the actions of the people that make me believe that they might have been involved in a criminal activity? I walk up to a group of people in a park, and as soon as they see me, all of a sudden things get dropped and crushed to the ground and people start running away. And I smell marijuana in the air. Oh, and they're under 21 nowadays. But you can't smoke in the park anyway because it's a public location. You can't, you still, even if you're an adult, you can't, over 21, you can't smoke in public places. Would that give you reasonable suspicion that those people were smoking marijuana? Yes. Now, I drive up to a 7-Eleven store at 3 a.m. and somebody's standing out front and they're talking to somebody, they look over at me, and then they take off running. Does that give me reasonable suspicion that they've committed a crime? You say no. Why not?
They just ran away, it's not necessarily, there was an alarm going off inside.
No alarms. They were talking to somebody else, and I'm just driving up to get a cup of coffee because it's 3 a.m. and I'm getting a little tired, and they just take off running. Who says that's enough for me to chase them down and tackle them? Why is that enough to chase them down and tackle them? Probable cause?
You ran from
Is it against the law to run from the police? If you're in pursuit, if I have a reason, it is against the law. Is it against the law to run because you see a police officer in the area? Just that fact. It is not. I have to be able to articulate some other things. Now there are some laundering municipal things that says that you can't run in certain circumstances from the police department or whatever else. But if I don't have anything else, I have to say goodbye to you and let you run away and then try to figure out something else that's going on.
Just do it.
So you see, being a police officer is not quite so easy as it seems on TV a lot of times. There are all nuances in crimes and whatever else. And if we have officers that are out there chasing people without reasonable suspicion, first off, what's the definition of probable cause? We've used that term now. Anybody know what the definition of probable cause is? I've taught them. You have taught them? You're putting him on the spot right now. Does anybody remember the definition of probable cause? Yes, ma'am. Oh, she's looking at her notes, but good for her.
Set of facts and circumstances that would induce a reasonably intelligent and prudent person.
To what?
Oh, shoot. Believe that a person did a crime.
A reasonable person, under these set of facts, would reasonably believe that a crime has been committed and that person has committed a crime. May not be exactly how, but that's the gist of it. A reasonable person believes that a crime has been committed and that person has committed a crime. That's probable cause. That's what I can arrest you on. What do they have to convict you on? So if you're in a jury and the judge is saying you've heard the evidence, now if you believe that the evidence shows guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a higher level, probable cause is here, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, reasonable suspicion is down here. Reasonable suspicion means, you know, there could have been a crime, could have been something going on, and that person could have been involved in that, but maybe not. But I'm going to check it out and find out if that is the case or not. I can stop people on reasonable suspicion and talk to you. So if I have a call for service that says, hey, there's a fight going on outside this apartment complex, and I drive up and there's 3 guys outside the apartment complex, but they're not fighting, can I go talk to them and see if they were involved in a fight? Yes. Reasonably suspicious. Reasonable that something might have happened and these guys might have been involved, but maybe they weren't involved. So I can stop and talk to them about that. there is a difference, as we talked about. How do we balance individual rights and freedoms then? How do I do my job and balance your rights and freedoms to move about without fear of oppression or racial profiling or getting beat by the officers? How do we balance those things? How's the police department supposed to balance these things?
Policies.
Policies, absolutely. Training, policies, internal affairs to make sure somebody's monitoring those things. Supervision, training on supervision, and make sure that our supervisors knows what's legal, what's not legal. Our supervisors go out with our officers and be out there. We do in-service training every year. So all those kinds of things we do to balance those rights and responsibilities. So let me give you this scenario. In the Broadmoor, I like 3 a.m. I worked midnights most of my patrol career. 3 a.m. We get a call, 911 call from residents in the Broadmoor area, and they say there's a suspicious black male walking down the sidewalk. And that's their 911 call. And so the dispatcher says, 4 Adam 51 or whatever the call sign is for the Broadmoor officer, let you know on the 300 block of Oak Drive, there's a suspicious black male walking down the sidewalk. Can I go talk to that person?
Yes.
Who says yes? Think I can? Yeah? Is there a reasonable suspicion that something occurred?
No, but you just talk about it.
We'll get back to that in just a second. That's an interesting point. Can I talk to anybody at any time for any reason just because? Can I walk up to you at the gas station where you're pumping gas and say, hey man, can I talk to you for a few minutes? Yeah. But what happens if you say, I don't want to talk to you? Then I say, okay, and keep going, right? So in this situation, if that black guy's going down the 300 block of Oak Drive, and I drive up and get out of my patrol car and say, hey man, can I talk to you for a minute? And if he comes over and talks to me, is that okay? Probably. Depends on some other things. Are my lights flashing? Am I using conversational tone? Or am I saying, hey, get over here and talk to me? Or am I saying, hey man, you mind if I talk to you for a few minutes? Is there a difference between that? Now, what if he says, and keeps on walking? What do I do then? Let him go. That's exactly right. Because I don't have any reasonable suspicion that a crime's been committed. And he doesn't want to talk to me. Now, can I walk beside him? Say, hey man, what's wrong? Whatever else? Can I do that? Anything illegal about that?
No.
Nothing illegal about that. If he starts jogging and I want to jog beside him, keep on talking to him, I can do that too. Those are the things that we need to learn about in police work, about balancing your rights and also the rights of the people, the other citizens, where crimes and things could occur. Any questions about that? Yes.
But if he says no and then he like starts walking faster and you keep on walking behind him, isn't that considered like stalking in a way?
If I continue to do it for a certain period of time, or repeatedly and those kinds of things. So when we talk about criminal stalking, it's repeated, it's over a period of time generally, and those kinds of things, not just a one-time thing. So I understand, is that harassment though? Is that official harassment for a police officer? Maybe. Could be. Maybe he makes a complaint about that. I told this guy I didn't want to talk to him. Started walking away, and he kept walking next to me. He kept on asking me questions, and I told him I didn't want to talk to him. Could that be harassment? Maybe, depending on the totality of the circumstances. Maybe so. Who wants to take a break? Nobody brave? We'll keep going then. So now I'm going to tell you about some stories. Real life stories that happened either here or in Houston, and if I use names, of officers. That's because the names of the officers were published in public, so I'm not divulging anything I should not be divulging. Mike Scheib case. Mike Scheib was a police officer, and when he came on, he got out of the training academy. I was one of his field training officers. So after you go to the academy, you go, and yes, if you want to go to the bathroom, get a drink, and come back, you're not going to fit me to do any of that kind of stuff. If you even don't come back, then I'll have to start worrying about what I'm saying. Mike Scheib, so I was his training officer. So I trained Mike, and back then there was 3 different training officers that you would go through, and there was a midterm evaluation and a final evaluation, and Mike came through without any problems. He's a pretty good officer, and did that. Now, this was back in the early 90s. Does anybody know what a cell phone looked like in the early 90s? One of those big brick things, right?
Yeah.
Back in about 92, I started working in our fugitive unit in the police department. That meant I got to dress like you do right now, blue jeans and t-shirts, and go arrest people on felony warrants or warrants. That's all I did, just go arrest people. They already had warrants out on them. On occasions, we couldn't find somebody, we couldn't find an address for them, but we would have a phone number. And so we would do this. I'd call up, or my partner would call up and say, hey, this is Scott from Blockbuster. And this is back when Blockbuster rented VHS tapes. So I am dating myself some. This is Scott from Blockbuster. If you answer these 4 questions, I'll give you a free gift certificate for 5 free movie rentals. How many people over the age of 18 live at your house? How many times in the last 6 months have you visited a Blockbuster store? How many movies have you rented in the last 30 days? Is your household median income above or below $50,000? Thank you very much. What name would you like to have on this gift certificate? Scott Whittington. Got a warrant, Scott Whittington. Mr. Whittington, what's your address? You want me to mail this to? 123 Main Street. Thank you very much. We'll be right there to see you. And we get in our car and drive to 123 Main Street, because back then, if I talked to somebody on the telephone, it was a hardline phone in their house. So I knew that they were home when I talked to them on the phone. Is that illegal? It's not illegal. It's not illegal at all. So, Mike Scheib, after he was a police officer for a couple of years, came and spent 2 weeks at a temporary assignment in a fugitive unit. And we taught him this ruse. If you know, calling about being a Blockbuster or whatever else. Then he leaves and goes back out on patrol. Now, patrol officers a lot of patrol officers like to specialize. Some people like stolen cars. Some people like to do narcotics. Some people like to do burglaries. Some people like to do robberies. They do everything, but they kind of specialize in some aspects of patrol. Mike Scheib used to do narcotics as a patrol officer, and he was pretty good at it. At one point in time, he came up to a person, I apologize, it should have been on. A person that he was looking into that, if I don't do this, it'll keep on chirping at me. That was doing drugs, at least he believed he was doing drugs, but he couldn't find out where he lived. And he started obsessing about this guy. He'd go home at night and think, well, how am I going to catch this guy? What am I going to do? What am I missing? What can I do about this? And during his follow-up investigations and stuff, he came across a phone number. He says, hey, my old FTO and fugitive unit, they taught me what to do. So he calls this guy up and says, hey, this is Mike from Blockbuster. And he goes through it and he finds out an address. He goes to that address and he calls for a cover car. So he has a second officer with him. The second officer doesn't really know about anything they're doing, and Mike's doing what we call a knock and talk. Anybody know what a knock and talk is when you're talking about narcotics? Anybody have any idea? Knock on the door and talk to him. That's exactly what it is. So you want to knock on the door, and you do a knock and talk like that, because a lot of times we get neighbors that say, hey, you know what, 2 houses down, cars are coming all day and night, and they're staying 5 or 10 minutes, and they're leaving. Is that indicative of a possible drug house? Yes. Is that probable cause to go get a warrant and go search the house? No. So we do a knock and talk. We go knock on the door and say, hey, this is Officer Whittington. I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes. What we want to do is get inside the house by permission. Do you mind if I come in and talk to you? Oh, come on in, officer. Why do I want to get inside the house? Plain view. Maybe they have a meth pipe on the kitchen table. Now do I have probable cause? Now I can go get a warrant. So that's the whole purpose, is to get inside, get evidence that you can see in plain view. Do I have a legal right to be inside the house if they invite me in? So is seeing that stuff illegal? No, it's not. So Mike does this. And he goes and knocks on the door, and the guy comes out, and this guy steps out on the porch and kind of closes the door almost all the way behind him. Mike says, hey, I'm Officer Scheid, I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes. You mind if we go inside? Well, this guy's been around the block a few times. He says, no, we'll talk right here. Mike talks to him, da-da-da-da-da-da, and asks him 3 or 4 times throughout his conversation, can we go inside? And the guy says, no, each time. Mike finally asks, do you have an ID? The guy says, yep. It's on my kitchen table. Mike says, can you go get it for me? So the guy opens the door and goes into the house to go get his ID. What does Officer Scheid do? Follows him in. Why does he follow him in? It's a good question, isn't it? There's a lot of possible reasons. One reason is we're taught for officer safety, don't let somebody get outside of your view. So if I'm talking to somebody in the living room and they want to go in the kitchen to get a glass of water, I don't let them go in the kitchen to get a glass of water without me following them into the kitchen, because I don't want them to grab a knife or a gun or a bazooka or whatever else. So Mike follows him in. I'm going to leave that part right there right now. He goes inside, and he does see some drug paraphernalia. So he secures the house with the other officer. He goes and gets a search warrant. In the police department, if you want to get a search warrant as an officer, you write your affidavit. And an affidavit for a search warrant is basically saying, here are the reasons, Judge, that I believe a crime has been committed and that there's evidence in this location that I want to collect to support that crime. Okay? So you got to have probable cause the crime's been committed and probable cause that evidence will be found wherever you want to search for. And since he saw drug paraphernalia, does he have probable cause that there's drug paraphernalia against the law in that? And where there's drug paraphernalia, isn't it reasonable to believe that there's something else, drugs or something else to go along with that drug paraphernalia? It is. So Mike's writing his warrant up and doing that, and he gets to the part to where he used the blockbuster ruse. And I, as an FTO, never talked to Mike about what to do in a report when you do a ruse. Because when I arrest somebody on a warrant, I don't have to do a case report. You have an active warrant. I confirm the warrant through NCIC, which is the database that holds those things, or CCIC, if it's a state warrant. And I take you to jail, and I fill out the booking paperwork. It says this is your name, this is the charges, and your property invoice and stuff like that, and I give you to the jail, and I never have to do a case report. So I never had to talk to Mike about the case report about this blockbuster ruse to use. So Mike didn't know what to do in this situation. This is according to Mike. And so he changes the story just a little bit. He says, I got the phone number, which is all true. Now he says he calls records and ID, and they do a reverse lookup on the phone number, and they find the address, and that's how he gets to the address. And he puts that in his affidavit. He gives his affidavit to his supervisor. Supervisor reads the affidavit, says, you got probable cause, go see a judge and get this signed. He goes to a judge. Judge reads it, says, puts it in the right hand. Everything in the warrant you solemnly swear is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Yes? Okay. Judge signs it. Mike goes back to the house, finds the drugs, arrests the bad guy, puts him in jail. A few months later, they have what's called a preliminary hearing. Does anybody know what a preliminary hearing is? See if it goes to trial. It's almost like a real mini trial, to where the judge says, I want to hear enough evidence to make sure that there's probable cause to go to trial. And so, Mike Shive gets a subpoena to go to court. The other officer gets a subpoena to go to court to testify in this preliminary hearing. The second officer pulls all the case reports, his and Mike Shive, so he can refresh his memory and memorize, all the details and those kinds of things. And he reads what Mike Shive says about getting into the house. And he's very uncomfortable with how he articulates that. He says, by his body language and a nod of the head, the guy kind of invited me to come into the house. I'm not going to argue that case right here and now, but that could be a civil rights violation, constitutional violation of illegal search and seizure by going into the house at that point in time. That's not the point of the story for this class here. We won't talk about that much more than that. Other than to say the secondary officer brought that forward to his supervisor and said, I don't like how this is written, that's not really how it happened. And so an internal affairs investigation occurred. Now, no one besides Mike knew that he lied on his affidavit, because no one besides Mike knew how he got to that address. And so there was an investigation about whether he violated the civil rights of these people, or this guy. And during that investigation, he disclosed to the investigator that he lied on that affidavit. So the investigation showed that Mike Shive lied to his supervisor and lied to a judge on his affidavit. You think that's a serious offense or not so serious offense? About as serious as you can get. About as serious as you can get. When an IA investigation, at least at this point in time, which has been a few years ago, we've changed some of the procedure, but back then, Internal Affairs does their investigation, gives their investigation to Mike Shive's chain of command, his sergeant, his lieutenant, his commander, his deputy chief. They all read the investigation and they all make recommendations as to what they're going to do to Mike Shive. The sergeant said, let's terminate him. The lieutenant said, let's terminate him. The commander said, let's terminate him. The deputy chief said, let's terminate him. And at this point, terminations went to the chief of police. And Lauren Kramer was our chief of police at this point in time. While this investigation was going on, Lauren Kramer got hundreds of contacts by officers saying that Mike Shive was a good guy. He made a terrible mistake, but he'll never make that mistake again. And he's a good officer. Give him a break. So Lauren Kramer made his most controversial decision and said, I'm going to give Mike Shive his job, but he's going to get a 6-month suspension without pay instead of terminating. And that broke the police department in half, because people had supported Mike and other people had said, you know what, he's a liar. We can't trust a liar. Why do we have a liar on the police department? And there was a big controversy about that. And I imagine that you haven't talked about the court case Brady versus Maryland yet. In brief, Brady versus Maryland says that if the prosecutor has exculpatory information about one of their witnesses, and does anybody know what exculpatory is? It's basically information that helps the defense. So if I have information as a prosecutor that helps the defense, I've got to disclose that information. So they have to disclose to the defense that Mike Shive was found guilty through the police department of departing from the truth or being a liar. Do you think a defense attorney would like to know that information when Mike Shive's on the stand?
Yes.
Absolutely. Could they try to impeach him by saying, hey, you've lied before, how do we know you're not lying here, and all those kinds of things? I won't get into all the nuances, but they couldn't ask those questions all the time. There was a focus of kinds of cases that they could ask those questions, and other cases they could not. So Mike Shive would have to, on occasion, explain what happened on the stand. After a while, he got tired of explaining that and kind of minimized his role, minimized what happened. And the prosecutor actually came to the police department and said if Mike Shive didn't lie on the stand this time, he came as close to lying as he could have, and Mike Shive was terminated at that point in time. So things happen in the police department. They don't happen with great regularity. It's been since, well, I mean, we may have somebody get convicted of departing from the truth once every 4 or 5 years or more, depending on the stretch of time. More often? Less often? Huh? No, we don't have anybody convicted of every year. Okay, we can look at the stats, but I don't believe it. Not convicted, maybe they did that, but they're not convicted.
Right. Well, Mike Shive was never terminated.
You're right, he's on, still probably on workers' comp.
No, he's medically retired. Get a good lawyer.
Ah, self-serving. Rich is a good lawyer for us. All right, sexting. Here's another story. Communications people. The dispatchers and the people that answer the telephone when you call for the police department. They have a great relationship with officers. They have that relationship because they communicate, you know, many, many times a day, many, many times all over the place, and you get to develop a relationship. Many times, officers date dispatchers. And, as in a lot of relationships, sometimes those relationships go sour. And then you have people still working for the police department. You have a dispatcher still dispatching the officer. Who now they're broken up, and who knows who's mad at who, and who takes whose side, and all those other kinds of things that happen when relationship happens, and those kinds of things. So those things happen. Well, we had an officer that was dating a probationary dispatcher. By probationary, I mean she had just been hired and she was still on her probationary status. So this officer was in love, maybe in lust, with this dispatcher, maybe both. And so he thought to himself, what can I do for my sweet girlfriend? And he says, I know, I got it. So he takes pictures of himself in his full glory, gets on the work email system, and sends them to her while she's working. And this sweet young dispatcher says, what a wonderful boyfriend I have. He is so considerate. What can I do for him? So she takes pictures of herself in all her glory and emails them back to him. Is that a violation of our policies? Absolutely. Absolutely. To make matters worse, the guy took some of the photographs that he emailed in the bathroom of our police operations center, and we know that because of the tile pattern on the floor of the bathroom. So I tell you these stories because police officers are people too, and we do have people make mistakes and do different things. So I don't want you to get the impression that CSPD does all kinds of heinous things all over the place. I've been here for 27 years. So these stories span 27 years worth of being in the police department and those kinds of things. Anybody want to take a break? All right. Blake and Erin story. Blake's my brother. He lives in Altadena, which is just north of Pasadena in California. He became a foster parent to Erin. And Erin was at this time 14 years of age, and Erin happened to be black. And my brother took him in as a foster child, and Erin had been living there for some period of time, and Erin did something I know I never did, and I would bet none of you ever did in your life. Told your parents you were going over here with this group of friends, and you went over here with a different group of friends. Well, that's what Erin did. Erin said, Blake, can I go over here and play with these guys? And Blake says, oh, they're pretty good guys. Yeah, go ahead. And he went over here with a different group of guys doing some other stuff. And they weren't doing anything wrong or anything bad. He just went with a different group of guys and he went skateboarding. Erin's a skateboarder. And in this town, at that point in time, if you were under the age of 18, you had to wear certain safety equipment if you were on a skateboarding park. You know, a helmet, elbow pads, whatever those were. And Erin was not wearing that equipment. The officer comes up, says, hey, you're not 18, you're not wearing your safety equipment, I'm gonna write you a ticket for not wearing your safety equipment. Now Aaron, even though he's been in multiple foster homes, has never had any run-in with the police department. And so, unlike the guy with Mike Shy, this was the first contact that Aaron had had with a police officer. So the officer's filling out his ticket to give Aaron, and Aaron tells him his first name, his address, his telephone number, his date of birth, and then he tells the officer a different last name. Now, at 14, Aaron didn't have any ID, didn't have anything, so the officer had to take his word at who it was, and he wrote the ticket and gave Aaron his copy of the ticket, and Aaron went home. Well, at some point in time, my brother Blake found the ticket or found out about the ticket, and even though he's my little brother, even he could tell that Aaron's last name was wrong on the ticket. So he says, Aaron, what happened? Aaron says, I was just scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was where I shouldn't have been. I was with people I shouldn't have been. I knew you were going to get mad at me. All these other excuses that a 14-year-old kid could come up with. So my brother Blake calls the police department and talks to the person who answers the phone. The person who answers the phone, and my brother says, hey, my foster child was at a skate park. He got a ticket for not wearing safety equipment, and when he talked to the officer, he gave the officer a wrong last name. What do we need to do? The person who answers the phone says, hey, just come on in, we can write him another ticket, but talk to the desk officer just to make sure that that's true. So Blake talks to a police officer at the police department. The police officer says, yeah, bring him in again, we can write him a new ticket, be a fine. And so a couple days later, Blake comes in with Aaron to the police department. He talks to the same desk officer who talked to him on the phone a couple days earlier. And the desk officer says, Aaron, because you're under the age of 18, I need to read you your Miranda rights before I talk to you. So he read him Miranda rights. And Blake's like, we already told you the whole story, so yeah, we'll talk to you. So the officer says, Aaron, I'm going to ask you two questions. One, did you know the person who came up and talked to you was a police officer? Yes, I did. Two, did you know you gave him the wrong last name? Yes, I did. Turn around. He handcuffed him, arrested him, and threw him in the cell. What do you think? What do you think about the situation? Arrested for lying to the police officer. Which, depending on exactly how you lie, in Colorado, could be a misdemeanor or could be a felony. It used to be always a felony, and then they changed it from misdemeanor to felony, depending on what's going on. What do you think? The officer do anything wrong? You say it's messed up. Did the officer do anything wrong? Did he do anything illegal?
I think he technically didn't do anything wrong, but I think one of your jobs as a police officer is to use judgment in like different situations. I know it's rough. Like he didn't do anything wrong because he wasn't like doing something illegal. He just didn't have safety equipment, which he possibly like didn't even know he needed. So like.
But he lied to a police officer about his name.
Right, but he wasn't.
So shouldn't he be held accountable for lying to a police officer about his name? Maybe not being arrested.
Stern.
Stern talking.
Well, what's the essence where he said that the police did it?
No, he got charged. He got charged with lying to a police officer. Yep, he got charged. I talked to officers about this same case, and most of them had the same impression that you do. He didn't do anything wrong, but that's, what a jerk. What an a-hole. Should have never done that. Because now, is Erin ever going to trust a police officer? And was my brother happy when he called me on the phone right after that event? Or is he saying, is this what you cops all do? No, you're right, judgment. Here we have some kid that's in foster care, and we have a foster care parent that's taking responsibility and trying to make the situation right. And so yes, we can charge him with another crime, but does judgment say the best thing to do is to write him a new ticket with a new name? Maybe document that stuff on the summons so the judge has that information if he wants to enhance any kind of penalties. So the ultimate case is that case was ultimately dismissed. So he didn't have any charges on that or ultimately they went through the process and the case got dismissed. But at the time he didn't know that. Meeting women on duty. There's a saying in police departments that the badge will get you many women, but it only takes one woman to get your badge. And you can all figure some of that stuff out. So I'm going to tell you a story. So we have two officers that are sent to a hit-and-run accident in the apartment complex. Yeah. Well, all these stories Rich knows about because he's our attorney for our association. So, they get sent to a hit-and-run accident. One officer's primary officer, one officer's secondary officer. They get to the accident. They have a witness that says, here's the license plate number of the car who hit this car and then took off. And they run the license plate number, and lo and behold, the address is just a few blocks away in an apartment complex. So they go over there to that apartment complex and they find the car, and it looks like it has brand new damage that's consistent with the damage on the other car that's on the accident. So they believe that this car is the car that was involved in the hit-and-run accident. They go up to the apartment, they knock on the door, woman answers the door. The primary officer, they get inside and they talk to her. The primary officer, through a conversation and everything, develops probable cause and arrests her for the hit-and-run. And he also arrests her for DUI because he smells alcohol and she's bloodshot eyes and all those other kinds of things you need to do. But he develops a probable cause to arrest her for the hit-and-run accident and DUI. So he arrests her, he puts handcuffs on her, takes her down to her car. The secondary officer never really has any conversation or communicates with this person at all. And makes sure he's okay, goes back to the accident scene. Other officers are doing the accident, he gets back in service. When we arrest somebody for DUI, we process them, whether they go to an intoxilizer or a breath test, or to the hospital to get a blood test, their choice, most times. Then we release them, make sure they can get back home without getting in a car and driving again. But we don't take them to jail just because they're arrested for DUI. So a few hours later, the same woman who was arrested calls dispatch and says, I can't find my cell phone, and the last time I knew I had that cell phone was when the officers were here in my apartment. Can I talk to one of the officers, or do they know where it is, or whatever else? The primary officer was busy on another call. So the dispatcher gets a hold of the secondary officer and says, hey, now she didn't have a cell phone, so she's calling from next door. And the officer calls back and says, he tries to tell her where he thinks it was. He says, look, I'm not very far away or whatever. And he goes over to the apartment to help her find her cell phone. And he says, I saw it on the arm of the couch. Maybe it fell down underneath the cushions or whatever else. And she's kind of moving cushions around. And he steps inside and helps her. And they find the cell phone underneath the couch cushions. Then she engages him in conversation about families, about other things, whatever else. They sit down on the couch. She kind of strokes his leg a little bit, tell him what a good-looking officer he is. He says, you know what, I gotta go. He says, you have a lunch break? He says, yeah, I get a lunch break. Why don't you come up back by lunchtime? And he worked a power shift, so he came in at 5 p.m. and he worked till 3 a.m. So about midnight, he tells the dispatcher he's going to go home to eat lunch. And where does he go? Goes to the girl's house. So he goes to the girl's house. They go in, they sit down on the couch, they start kissing a little bit more. They start fondling a little bit. And he goes, whoa, I gotta go. I don't want to get in this. He's married, he's got 2 kids. He's having problems in his marriage. And she says, what time do you get off? He says, 3 a.m. He says, here's my key, why don't you come on back by? Well, the officer makes a fatal mistake when he gets off work and he comes back by. They take a shower together. She gives him oral sex, wipes him up. Once again, he says, ooh, I gotta go. So they text back and forth a little bit and those kinds of things and whatever else. And then, within a reasonably short period of time, she says, hey, can you give me the name of the witness that said I was driving the car because I wasn't? Now, to the officer's credit, he says, no, I can't do that for you. You can get a copy of the accident report or whatever else. And she keeps texting back and forth, hey, can you give me the name of that person because, I didn't do it or anything like that. And then she starts saying, hey, why don't we go to your division and talk to your commander, Commander Howard, and tell him what happened. Oh, by the way, the rag I wiped you up with, I still have it. Women can get you, or your badge can get you many women. It takes one woman to get your badge. This officer was concerned enough that he went to Mr. Radabaugh, who counseled him to come to the police department because she was going to come to the police department, and it's better to hear it from the officer first instead of her. So he came and we call fall on your sword, or tell your story, tell what happened, take ownership of what happened, and he tells us all this stuff that went on. I was in internal affairs at that point in time. I never could get her to come in and give me a story. She refused to come in. So that investigation occurred, and because he came in and told us, he did not get fired at that point in time. He got significant suspension time, but he did not get fired. He had another incident some months later that did get him fired, so he doesn't work for us anymore. Gratuities. Who knows what a gratuity is as far as the police department is concerned? Free food, free coffee, free Cokes. Go to 7-Eleven, you know, they say, hey, have a cup of coffee. It's on the house, don't worry about it. It's a Southland Corporation policy to give police officers, wherever the 7-Eleven is, free coffee. Why do you think 7-Eleven does that? They want the officers coming by all the time, right? If an officer's in the business, he's not going to get robbed, probably, right? So they do those things so they get officers to come in. Now, is it against our policy to take gratuities? Technically, yes. It is against our policy to take gratuities. Gratuity is defined as taking something of value to somebody else, and then you would have some kind of expectation of something in return. Some people argue 7-Eleven clerks don't have any expectations for anything in return because it's a corporate policy all over the United States, and so it doesn't affect this person or whatever else. Other people say you see this same person 3, 4, 5 times a week. When you go in the 7-Eleven store and now you stop them on a traffic stop, are you going to give them a ticket because you know them and they give you free coffee? Is there a conflict there? Could be. Could be. That's really low-level stuff, though, because we very rarely see any issues that happen with that. And it's a Southland Corporation policy. It's not the individual policy. Now, officers can bring their own coffee, go back into the substation to get coffee, but sometimes those things just aren't practical, so it is very easy to go get coffee. Some places get officers half-price meals. For a couple of different reasons, maybe. Maybe they give half-price meals because they want officers to come in, and some businesses just want to give back to police officers, give back to the community and say, hey, you guys do a great job, we appreciate what you do, and that. So, there's a McDonald's up in Rock Rimmon. Anybody know that McDonald's up in Rock Rimmon? All right. So an officer continually, on a fairly regular basis, goes to the McDonald's because they give him a half-price meal. This one day he goes to McDonald's in his fully marked patrol car, in uniform, goes through the drive-thru, orders his Big Mac or whatever it is, and the girl says 6:32, come up to the window. He comes up to the window and she says 6:32, and he says, you don't understand, I'm supposed to get a half-price meal. He goes, I'm new, I've only been here for a couple of days, no one's ever told me about that. Get your manager. So the manager comes over. Now, picture this in your head. 16, 17-year-old girl working at McDonald's, only been there for a couple of days. She's holding this bag of food. There's an officer in a patrol car in his uniform, and there's a manager, and the officer's arguing with the manager about half-price meal, $3 or whatever it is. And the manager says, you know, officer, normally we do give you a half-price meal and that kind of stuff, whatever, but she's new, she rang you up, can you pay the $6.32 or whatever it was, and that. The officer gets mad, he reaches up, snatches that bag out of that girl's hand and drives away. Who knows the definition of robbery? Do you know the definition of robbery or you just stretching? The definition of robbery is taking something of value from some person by the use of force, threats, or intimidation. It's that fit the definition of robbery? Luckily, this officer was not charged, but he no longer works for the police department.
But he did get the street name of the hamburger. The chief didn't like that.
Do you remember swope it?
Yeah, he smoked it.
He smoked it? When an officer swoped it, supposedly took money home to put in evidence the following day. His last name was Swope. He no longer works for us either. But for a long time, when somebody stole something, we talked about he swoped it. Greed, anger, lust, law enforcement culture, noble cause corruption, peer pressure. Some of the reasons why officers do bad things. Greed. Do you think the officer had an entitlement mentality when he took that McDonald's bag from that girl? Absolutely. A little bit of greed there or whatever else, I'm entitled in that. Anger. What does anger lead to in law enforcement? What kind of misconduct? Police brutality, excessive force. Absolutely, Bill. Lust. I told you a couple stories about lust already. That's how we get in trouble with that. Next couple slides, I'm going to talk to you about law enforcement culture. Noble cause corruption. Anybody figure out, based upon the words here, noble cause corruption, what that really means? What does noble mean? Go ahead.
I think maybe not taking the straight route, fudging things a little bit because you want to do something right, but there's a roadblock.
Mike Schott maybe could be called noble cause. I want to get this narcotics dealer off the streets. I just didn't go about it in the right way. And officers who have a strong feeling about victims can get caught up in this. I've got a woman who's been sexually assaulted repeatedly, and I know this guy did it, but I don't quite have enough evidence to arrest him. So I do something to make up the evidence or do something to make it so I can arrest him. Because I'm so worried about this victim and I want to have closure for her. So I want to do that, so I do something wrong in order to have that happen. Peer pressure. Police officers have peer pressure just like you and everybody else has peer pressure. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. I tend to think the vast majority of the peer pressure in the police department is good peer pressure because we have officers come forward and say, that Whittington, you got to watch him because he did this and this and that shouldn't have happened. So we have officers coming forward and doing this. Solidarity and isolation. This is what I'm going to talk about when I talk about police officer or law enforcement culture. Solidarity. We got to stick together. Police officers are going to save police officers. If I get in a fight and get on the radio and say, help, police officers are going to come to my help. Police officers are going to come help me on a big investigation to help collect evidence, to investigate and talk to witnesses or victims and do all those other kinds of things. If I get in a shooting, other officers are going to come help me. Who's going to protect me? Other officers are going to protect me. And so we're the biggest gang in town. We got to stick together. All those kinds of things come about because we get a mentality of isolation. When we talk about a mentality of isolation, one of the biggest things that you're taught in the academy is officer safety. How to be safe when you're talking to suspects and people out there in the streets. And you're taught that a 5-year-old or an 85-year-old can hurt you. It's their hands. Watch their hands. Hands in their pocket, get them out of their pocket. You don't know what's in their pocket. Stand 3 to 5 feet behind them. Don't have your gun facing them so they can grab your gun. Keep it out like this. Anybody can do anything. There's not a routine traffic stop. You can get shot on any traffic stop you stop. So you don't get careless and just think it's a routine. People can hurt you. People can hurt you. People can hurt you. And so you start thinking, wow, citizens out there can hurt me. Not only that, when you become a police officer, you work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you can work midnights, that power shift I was talking, swing shift, day shift, whatever else, work weekends, work holidays, work all those kinds of things. And so we have a lot of college kids that come to work for us, and they have their buddies that they hung out with during college, and they come to work for the police department, and the buddies say, hey, let's go get a beer and go see a movie on Friday night. Sorry, I got to work. Hey, come over for Thanksgiving dinner. We'll get together. Sorry, I got to work. And so what happens is you start losing that friendships with those people you had before because it's very hard to match your schedule with their schedule and everything else. So who do you hang out with? Police officers, because they work the same schedule you do, they understand the things you're going on, especially when you're new, you talk about police stuff. You talk about the newest AR-15, you talk about the scopes, you talk about the best flashlight, the most candle power for the smallest flashlight that you can have, you talk about the car that you chased last night, you just talk about that, and so you have that solidarity and isolation. When police officers go to a restaurant, eat in a restaurant, where do they sit? They sit where they can see the front door. Why do they want to see the front door? They want to see that person that's going to come in and hurt them. Somebody going to do something bad, they're going to come to that front door, so I want to put my eyes on them so I can kind of look and see. Do I need to be worried about that person or whatever else? Now, I've been a police officer for over 30 years, and not one time ever been in a restaurant on duty or off duty or any period of time in my life that I had to do anything law enforcement related. And to this day, when we go to a restaurant, the table's kind of in a weird angle. My wife says, which side? Because I still have to sit on the side to watch. Because that's ingrained in me. Also, police officers will listen to conversations going on around them, just in case they can pick up something that says somebody's going to have an argument or whatever else. And it's so funny because I'll mention something to the group I'm with, whether it's family or whatever else, about a conversation I'm hearing around me, and they have no clue as to what I'm talking about. No clue whatsoever. If I'm talking to other officers, they go, yeah, I know it, I heard it too, that kind of stuff. Because we have that. So that creates that solidarity and that isolation. That is us. We have to stick together. And those people can hurt you. Pretty much what I talked about, those two things. The code of silence arises as a consequence of this thing. What's a code of silence? Not telling on each other. I don't want to tell on Rich Radaball, who's my partner, that he did something wrong, because tomorrow night I might be in a fight and he might be the closest officer there, and I'm going to get on the radio and say help, and Rich is going to say, that rat, he turned me in yesterday. I'm going to finish my cup of coffee before I get over there. That's some of the thought process. Now Rich would never do that, obviously. But that's some of the thought process, is that you don't want to do that because they're out there and they're the ones that help you, so therefore we don't tell on officers. That's where you get officers, bad officers, that do things wrong, and other officers know about it, but they don't bring it forward. Law enforcement agencies, and I suspect most businesses have something like this, some level of it, where it's a big level, like Houston. None of those cops were going to turn into cops for beating that guy down. Here we have a lower threshold. The cop runs a red light because he wants to go to lunch and he's late for meeting whoever he's going to meet at. Probably not going to tell him on that. An officer beats somebody like that, they're going to tell him on that. If an officer steals something from a prisoner, they're going to tell on that. So there's different levels of things that go on in that. But that's part of the problems, it's part of the things that you'll see in law enforcement agencies. And the culture of each agency is a little bit different. Not only where you're at, but what segment of the country you're in. The culture back in the Northeast or the East Coast and the West Coast are different than the culture here in the Midwest or the West. Noble cause corruption, I already talked to you about that. The end justifies the means. Loyalty versus integrity. Is loyalty a good thing? Is integrity a good thing? Which one's most important? Loyalty versus integrity, they bump heads from time to time. They'll do that when you're a student, they'll do that at work for you as well as us. Integrity always has to win. Always has to win. Whether you're telling on a fellow student, telling on a fellow officer, any of those kinds of things, integrity has to win. That's my presentation.